crispy blue sky here in California. I'm getting a lot of that out in Virginia as well, but generally more clouds, way more clouds, and cumulus clouds, cirrus clouds, cloudy clouds, just a lot of clouds. And rain. But I gotta tell you, I was here, I think I came in on Tuesday. I was on East Coast time, so Wednesday morning, I wake up at 5:30 in the morning. I'm like, okay. There was no one up, so I got out, wandered around, and went for a really, really long walk, because I had been sitting on the plane for a while. So I went for that walk, and lo and behold, and to my surprise, it started raining. And of course, I had no umbrella, so I just parked myself under a canopy there, and that worked out pretty good. All right, so I want to thank all you folks for coming out and sharing this explorative adventure with me, and just give you a little background on how I got started in this. I'm one of the original and founding members of the Greengrass Cloggers. And get your kicks clogging, right? But over the years of dancing with the group, and we danced pretty much all over the United States and various other parts of the world, and what I noticed at a lot of the places that we were hired to dance was that generally there was not a lot of people of color playing the old-time music or even the bluegrass music. And so out of curiosity, again, most of the places that we went, I did not necessarily see myself being represented. So I had questions, and I started talking to mostly a lot of the old fiddlers and saying, hey, tell me a little bit about your community and how you played and the kinds of people that you played with. And of course, almost everyone that I talked to, made reference to a black person that they played with when they were way, 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 way younger. And then, of course, I just fell into this mode where I had to find black fiddlers. And so I went on this search, of which I didn't find very many. At the time, there was Joe Thompson, and Joe Thompson, and Joe Thompson, and this was in North Carolina. Anyway, I went to visit him, and a lot of what he said was just a lot of the people that he played with had either died, and a lot of the younger people coming up basically had no interest in the music at all. He made reference to a little grandson, who every time he took out his fiddle, that his grandson would dance around and bop around to it. So he thought there was maybe a little bit of a promise in him. So at this point, I'm sure that person has grown up, but I haven't seen him on the circuit at this point. So anyway, I'm not here to go anywhere. I'm just here for the pat down.
Okay. I love that.
Yes. Yes.
If they want to have a microphone, I will bring you a microphone. If you want to shout really loud, that's good too.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a basically audio visual, and I do leave room and space for taking questions. Generally toward the end, I'm a fast reader and a fast talker, and I have also been a fast clogger at some point in my life, but now I just kind of take it a little easy. Anyway, without much beyond that, here we go. What came out with that? That was cut off my CD, the Earl White String Band. What's the tune?
You pointing out?
You Piney Mountain. All right, so as I said, I'm a fast reader, so I'm going to read through this. You can read through it as well. But the purpose of this presentation is to bring light to the many, but not all of the individuals who played a role in and influenced the shaping of the sounds of Appalachia. We will deliver, or I will deliver, my message, the fact that old time and country music was always a music shared by both the black and the white communities.
Earl, talk into the microphone.
Oh, yeah. It's like, what's this thing in my hand? During the past 50 years, we've seen, or actually longer than that now, I guess I was younger when I wrote this, but we've seen and have been a part of the old-time music revival. Through its popularity, though its popularity has waxed and waned, I witnessed the biggest surge of interest in the 1980s when Jimmy Carter was president. His daughter Amy was a clogger. The Plank Road String Band played at the White House, and America's awareness of old-time music reached an all-time high. Since the late 1700s, well into the 1800s to now, black Americans have been playing old-time music in the Appalachians and beyond. From the Catskills in upstate New York and Midwest to the Deep South, black American influences can be heard in every region. Though blacks had an influential impact due to the circumstances of their times, segregation, discrimination, and prejudice, little has been documented as to who many of these people were. There were many instances of blacks and whites playing music together, but if you were white, it was not customary to state that you had learned anything from a black person. Ever notice how there are countless pictures of black people holding the banjo? Generally no name associated with the person. Black people holding even the fiddles, and there's no name associated with the person. And that's what I pretty much ran into a lot when I was doing my search for black fiddlers. Anyway, again, as noted above, the repressions of the times are evident. I've composed a list of names and pictures of a few blacks, some known, most unknown, who actually made a difference.
Just a note, Jimmy Carter was not president in the 80s.
He wasn't president in the 80s? Actually, he was president in the 80s.
Well, yeah, for a couple of
For a couple of weeks. Jimmy Carter? Okay, so anyway, much of the inspiration and development of old-time and country music has been attributed to the genre's founders, to the black American musicians of the South, people like Jimmy Rogers and his youthful association with black and white railroad section gangs, Hank Williams and the street singer Rufus Tito, T-Tot, Payne. Both Bill Monroe and Merle Travis attribute much of their learning from Arnold Schultz. As it goes with the Carter family, they learned much of their music through the playing of Leslie Riddle of Burnsville, North Carolina. So again, there are many more, of which there is little or no mention, and countless pictures of nameless people of color bearing witness through their association with the instruments. So as many might know, and as more than that don't know, there are a few instruments that come out of Africa that are predecessors to the banjo as we know it. One of those instruments is the kora. The other is an akantine. And again, as we get further into this presentation, you'll find out a little bit more information about how that came to be changed.
It's about Gambia and Senegal, composed by my father, to tell both Gambians and Senegalese that we are all one. When we meet, we should greet each other, talk nicely to each other, and remember that we are one people, collective personality, not different people. And it's called Gambia of Senegal. Gambia, Sabi, USA, Sabi, Gambia, Sabi, Senegal, Sabi.
Yeah. Hey. Now, was that claw hammer or what? Yeah, I was going to. Sounds a lot like a lot of my friends, banjo players. Anybody ever read the book or see the movie 12 Years a Slave? Okay, well, I had the privilege of playing the role of Solomon Northup when I lived in upstate New York. My friend Frank Orsini called me up and said, Earl, Saratoga Springs, they're starting this festival called Solomon Northup Days. I'm not sure if they still do it or not, but anyway, they needed a black fiddler and they couldn't find one. So, Frank and I had been friends for a while, but anyway, in the Solomon Northup story, he was a free black man who farmed with his family in upstate New York. He's known well in the communities that he played. During the winter months, he was farming. He would basically play his instrument to supplement his income. Anyway, as the story goes, he was drugged and sold as a slave in Washington, D.C., and remained a slave until a group of black and white friends bought his freedom. Saratoga, New York. Again, as I said, I'm not sure if they still have the festival, but it was a very well attended festival, and the first year was the commemoration of the writing of the book and the signing. That sounds good. Anyway, this is, if anyone ever here watched the documentary, it's a 4-part documentary put out by WNET TV in Manhattan. It's called Slavery and the Making of America. Anybody seen that? If you haven't seen it, check it out. It basically gives a history of how slavery started in the United States and basically the contribution that slaves made to the making of America. Well, this gentleman here playing the gourd banjo, his name is Sheikh Hamalad Abede, and they flew him in from Mali to be a part of this documentary. And so he and I got to play the role of slave musicians, of which I learned a lot. The slave musicians were basically probably the more better dressed slaves living on plantations. And they were used as commodities. They were commodities because they could be rented to the next plantation to do concerts and basically play music. And a lot of them, again, were either taught by their masters or learned just from hanging back and watching. So anyway, Shake and I got to play the role, and if you get a chance to see the documentary, we're in part 2 of that. And the scene basically depicts, well, after the slaves are out working in the fields all day or doing stuff around their masters' houses, what did they do in their own community? And a lot of it was just enjoyment of playing music and dance and merriment. I'll tell you a funny story. So a lot of the filming was done in Annapolis and in St. Mary's City, Maryland. And they had a lot of plantations, and they were the biggest slave ports for that in the United States. Well, the day that we arrived, the longest car I ever saw in my entire life, and it pulls up, and out peels 4 people, and they're standing side by side, one on each side of each other. And then this guy emerges, and he's got this really high hat on, and he's wearing this beautiful white robe, all laced in gold, and this really long tail. And so he gets out, and behind him, or 8 other people come out of the car, and they're all walking behind him and holding his tail to his robe like that. Well, we go in, we do the greeting, we're all hanging out in the green room, and the costume department comes out and names everybody, and they walk up to Shake, and they're holding this pile of clothes, basically look like rags, and he looks at it and says, "What? I am not wearing that shit. In my country, I am a king." And his wife walks over to me and says, "Oh, Mr. White, please, just talk to him. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand because, they didn't know slavery and where he came from." And so, anyway, we took a really, really long walk, and I talked to him, and he didn't speak very good English, so I had to, in whatever way I could, just explain what was going on. And, of course, he agreed to do it, and in the end, we were all happy campers. So happy to the point where I said in the green room, I was like, well, I would do this. I don't know what all the fuss was about. Being a slave wasn't so bad after all. And that was because we spent 3 weeks staying in the Marriott Hotel and eating 3 meals a day, and it was just an incredible experience. Anyway, everybody got a really, really big laugh out of it, because if you don't laugh in life, I can guarantee you will die early. So don't take some parts of life too seriously, right? Okay, Joel Sweeney. Joel Walker Sweeney. Well, Joel Sweeney was the person who's credited for changing the aspect of the banjo. I wouldn't say the total aspect of the banjo. But anyway, adding a 4th and then eventually a 5th string to the banjo as we know it today. And in many, many ways, I feel like it was a really good thing, but he lived from 1810 to 1860 and basically changed the banjo into more of what we play today. Born in 1810 in Buckingham, Virginia, he was an American musician, an early blackface minstrel performer. Well, he was known for making the banjo popular and is credited for advancing the banjo to its present form. He apparently also added the 5th string.
Hey, Earl?
Yes?
But in that earlier shot of the earlier instrument, there was a high string on that, so...
The earlier instrument, which the canting, or
Yeah.
the one that was being played?
Yeah.
Yes, but there were only 3 strings, 2 or 3 strings. 3 strings.
What's confusing is there was a high drone string in those early instruments. When you say add the 5th string, it makes you think he added that high string, but that's not really...
Well, but see, I don't know his purpose for adding that high string, but again, a canting instrument itself and the way it was being played, I mean, to me, when I'm listening to it, I'm beyond the vocal aspect, but I'm listening to the instrument. It sounds like clawhammer banjo to me. There's another shot where anyway, you'll see it at the end.
Right.
This is replicas of gourd banjos, and again, 5th string added. In 1840, Joel Sweeney again added the 5th string and is credited for making the instrument popular among white audiences. And again, just Mark was just remarking on, well, you know, you take an instrument and, you know, just like the fiddle, you know, depending on what your ethnic persuasion is, you might play in a style that's more, you know, prevailing of your environment. So. This is Cedric Watson playing a gourd banjo.
Oh, go dig a hole in the meadow. Go dig a hole in the ground. Go dig a hole in the meadow and let me lay darling Corey down. The last time I saw darling Corey at the edge of the deep blue sea. 44 around her and a banjo on her knee. Wake up, darling Corey. How can you sleep so sound? Revenue officers are coming. He's gonna burn your steel house down. Go away, darling Corey, and bring to me my gun. I ain't no man for trouble, but trouble has just begun. I ain't no man for trouble, but I'll die before I run. The last time I saw darling Corey had a 44 in her hand. I killed that revenue officer if he leaves here with my man. Across the deep blue ocean, across the deep blue sea, bring to me darling Corey, wherever she may be. Go away, darling Corey, quit your hanging around my leg. The whiskey done ruined my body, and pretty women gon' ruin my head.
All right, so I was just thinking about that comment you made there a little bit, Mark.
Talk, yeah.
I thought about that. I was a drama minor in college and I had to take voice and diction. And one of our classes was standing on stage and you had to whisper in such a way that the person in the very back could hear you. So. Anyway, what I thought about was the possibility in terms of that 5th string, not necessarily, and I don't know, but potentially not being added as a drone, but potentially being added as part of the scale, because in the Akanti there are no frettage as such, it's fretless. But anyway, as he was playing, that's one of the thoughts that I had. Jim and Andrew Baxter. I believe there's some cards out there that talks a little bit about these guys, but they were Black American fiddler and American Cherokee singer, guitar player. We're a father-son duo from Gordon County, Georgia. They recorded in the 1920s. They were very, very well known in their day and played all around Georgia and beyond, and played tunes like the KC Railroad Blues, the G-Rag, and 40 Drops. And again, a lot of what I read about these guys too, in their travels because of segregation and prejudice, you know, they were hard times, but either way, it was part of the way that they made their living, and you know, they plowed right through, and I appreciate them bringing predecessors to open doors for people like myself to play. These guys played a lot with a group called the Georgia Yellowhammers. In fact, there was, from what I understand, there was a lot of radio play where if the Yellowhammers fiddler was not able to make it, they would ask Andrew to play in his place. And a lot of those times, it wasn't, again, being on radio, you couldn't tell what color the players were, and they made a point of not mentioning the fact that they had a black fiddler playing with them. So the group often played with Jim and Andrew from Curryville, Georgia. Curryville was also home to the music legend Roland Hayes. Andrew Baxter's unique style of fiddle is heard on early recording of the band's favorite G-Rag. The Baxters were African Americans, and which is was an unusual collaboration at the time. The band released one of the top-selling records, 1920s Southern music, with 1927 release of The Picture on the Wall, My Carolina Girl. The 1927 recording session with the Baxters took place in Charlotte, North Carolina, and was a rare integrated session, which was uncommon even though the mid to late 20th century. Often because of Jim Crow laws, the Baxters had to ride in separate cars, and even though they would travel together a lot, they often recorded their sessions separately. Many of the exceptions was with the recording of the G-Rag in 1927. So again, even though, in the public view, you know, they pretty much had to hide a lot of their association with each other. There were stories about them going places, and the people that would put them up, the Yellowhammers would eat in the kitchen, and the Baxters were basically confined to eating out in the backyard. And through that, again, to me, in my search for black fiddlers, and again, part of my presentation is saying that it's not a black music, it's not a white music, it was always pretty much shared. I can't say shared by everybody, but there are those pockets of which black and white musicians played together and shared the music. And to me, this is just one of those examples. I gotta tell you, when I first did this, it's like 3 hours long, and I had to chop it down. So if I speed through, and might appear to have left some things out. So Arnold Schultz, 1886 to 1931, was an influential black fiddler, guitarist who is noted as a major influence in the development of the thumb style or Travis picking method of playing guitar. The son of a former slave, Schultz was born in Ohio County, Kentucky, into the family of touring musicians. In 1900, he began studying guitar under his uncle and developed a jazzy thumb style method of playing the guitar that eventually evolved into the Kentucky style, for which such musicians as Chet Atkins and Merle Travis would be known. Professionally, Schultz was a laborer, traveling from Kentucky to Mississippi and New Orleans. In the 1920s, he played the fiddle in the White Hillbilly and Dixieland band of Forrest Boots. Gotta be careful how you say that one. Anybody want to give it a shot? I say fault. Don't say it too fast. Anyway, he also played with Charlie Monroe and gave Bill Monroe his opportunity to play his first paid gig, which was a square dance, with Schultz on the fiddle and Monroe on guitar. Though he was not recorded, his blues playing and it had a powerful influence. Bill Monroe has openly cited Schultz as an influence in his playing, and Schultz taught his guitar methods to Kennedy Jones, who disseminated the thumb style methods further. His methods were passed down to Merle Travis and Ike Everly. Schultz died in 1931 of a heart attack, though legends have persisted that he died as a result of a poisoning by a white musician who was jealous of him. Less colorful reports indicate that he suffered a stroke while boarding a bus. Now, Greengrass Cloggers, we were dancing at the Angiers Festival one year, and the Bill Monroe band was backing us up. And Bill Monroe walked over to me and says, you know, you remind me a lot of a fellow I used to play with a long time ago. But there was no name, no mention. You know, and I was 19, 20. I was like, yeah, okay, Bill. More like, so what, back in that time. But anyway, as I went on my search, that's where I realized or discovered that the person that I reminded him of was Arnold Schultz. And again, in my thoughts, it's like, well, you know, I'm wondering, well, why did he tell me a name, give me the name of the person? And like I said, back in his day and back in his times and those times of the past, if you learned a tune from a black person, it was not cool or customary to go out and say, hey, I learned this from old Black Joe or Arnold Schultz or whoever. You know? So anyway, that within itself, again, kind of lends itself to not a lot of recognition being given and not a lot of credit being given to the contribution that a lot of black musicians made to old-time music. It's a picture of Arnold Schultz. And in this picture, there's Uncle Pen. Anybody ever hear of Uncle Pen? You know Uncle Pen, right? And again, Arnold Schultz with fiddle. Looks like his brother, Luther Schultz, on the bass. But who's the guitar player? Okay, anyway, there's a gravestone of Arnold Schultz. And I can see it a little better from here. Now it's still a little bit blurry, but anyway, it just basically talks about him and his music of the area. So. Leslie Riddle. So Leslie Riddle was born in 1905 in Silver's Gap, community of Yancey County, North Carolina. When he was in his mid-teens, Leslie had a horrific accident in which his right foot slipped into an auger in the floor of a cotton mill. The giant screw chewed off his leg up to the knee. This handicap allowed Leslie a lot of downtime, you can imagine, and he became interested in playing guitar. His mother's brother, Ed Martin, played guitar and knew dozens of blues and gospel songs. Ed taught Leslie some guitar techniques and introduced him to other musicians around Kingsport. Leslie was barely healed from his leg amputation when he and his uncle were arguing over a shotgun. The shotgun discharged and Leslie's right hand gripped the end of the barrel. He lost his middle and ring fingers of his hand. Later, Leslie had to adjust his picking techniques to use only his thumb, index, and his little fingers. John Henry Lyons' front porch was a favorite hangout of the East Tennessee musicians and others traveling through the area. Blind Lemon Jefferson, Styx and Brownie McGee, Steve Totter, and others frequented the porch. In late 1927, A.P. Carter paid a visit to the porch and was looking for songs for Carter family's recording session with Ralph Peer of Victor Records. As Leslie described it, John Henry passed a guitar to Leslie and told him to play Mr. Carter a piece. He played him a couple pieces and Mr. Carter wanted him to go home with him right then and there. And if you notice on his, you can barely see, but his hand resting on the top of the guitar there, he has a few missing fingers. So So Leslie's association with the Carters began a musical partnership that lasted over 5 years and a friendship that endured for half a century. Leslie would spend as much as 2 weeks at a time at AP and Sarah's house in Macy Springs. Just down the road lived Maybelle and Ezra. As Leslie would describe it to Mike Seeger, I played somewhere all the time, sometimes down at X, most times at Mr. Carter's, just playing and singing. That's all they would basically do. What the Carters got from these jam sessions was Leslie's repertoire of blues and gospel songs. Songs he had learned from Steve, Blind Lemon, Brownie, and John Henry, and others he had heard his mother and Ed Martin sing. Leslie told Seeger that the Carters rarely played for him. And again, things that I've read also, that the Carters were not very prolific writers, but Leslie became a gateway to the black community and for a lot of the people living in the mountainous areas of that part of North Carolina. And again, because of the sign of their times, in the beginning there was not a lot of information that went out about that association and in that reference. John Henry, anybody out there play that? Yeah. So Dietrich Bailey was an American country music and blues star from the 1920s until 1941. He was the first performer introduced on the Grand Ole Opry and was the first black American performer on the show. Most members of his family played instruments, and his grandfather, Louis Bailey, was a champion fiddler. The tunes they played were part of the rich tradition of string band music, a style that Deifert called black hillbilly music. In the early opera years, the show embraced all types of indigenous music and made no attempts to limit itself to an all-white audience. In fact, efforts were made to attract a colored audience. The Opry and all of the WSM shows were designed to sell national life insurance, which a large portion of nationalized business consists of small policies popular with both black and white low-income customers. Judge Hay told Deifert that half the money came from colored people. Deifert was known only as a radio star on the Grand Ole Opry, and most of the audience did not know that he was a black man. His race may have been known in the black community, but not mentioned on air. This was not accidental. Judge Hay believed that the Opry fans would blow us out if Deifert's race was publicized. His concern was proved very wrong. In the early 1933, WSM organized the Artists Service Bureau, a booking agency designed to promote personal appearances for the stars. By this time, Deifert was one of the most popular musicians on the Opry. Surprisingly, when his race became apparent on tour, it seemed to make little difference to the audiences. Uncle Dave Macon was the Opry's favorite performer, and I was the second. These are the words of Deifert. Roy Acuff recalled that Deifert would always draw a crowd when out on the road. All of the major acts took Deifert with them to guarantee a larger crowd. Howard Armstrong, anybody out there know Howard Armstrong? Yeah, Louie Bluey. As a Greengrass choir, got to hang out with Howard and the Martin Bogan and Armstrong band quite a bit back in those days. And anyway, Howard Armstrong was born in Dayton, Tennessee, and grew up in Lafayette. He was a middle son from a musically talented family of 9 children. His father was also a musician, but supported his family with a job in a local steel mill. As a young teenager, he taught himself to play fiddle and joined a band led by blind Roland Martin and his brother Carl Martin. They toured in the United States, performing a wide range of music, from work songs, spirituals, through popular tin-pan alley tunes, and foreign language songs. For a few years, Armstrong attended Tennessee State Normal School, as compared to abnormal school, as an art student studying painting and design, while also playing cello in the symphony orchestra and fiddle in a jazz band. Armstrong and his brother Roland and Carl Martin billed as the Tennessee Chocolate Drops, recorded on Vocalion Records at the St. James Hotel in Knoxville on April 3rd, 1930. Adding guitarist Ted Bogan, the band toured as part of a medicine show and backed tune blues musicians such as Big Bill Broomsey and Memphis Minnie. As Martin Bogan and Armstrong, they also performed at the 1933 World's Fair in Chicago. In 1934, Armstrong and Bogan recorded the State Street Rag and Ted Stump for Bluebird Records, with Armstrong using the stage name Louie Bluey, which had been given to him by a fan. Now, one of my first trips to Fiddle Tunes out in Port Townsend was one of the years that Howard Armstrong was playing there. And I took his blues fiddle class, which I don't remember a whole lot from that, but there was one tune that I do remember. Anyway, I got to, being that I was the only black musician in the class, I got to dress up, and for our class showcase, I got to play the role of Howard Armstrong. I was very honored to do that. Painted a little mustache. That lasted for a pretty long time because my girlfriend did it in magic marker. I couldn't take it off for a while. Joe and Odell Thompson.
I can't eat unless I see.
Wait a minute. And then on Black Annie. Black Annie? Yeah.
Joe and Odell Thompson. All right. So the first time I met Joe, I met him through Alice Gerard, and she was coordinating the old time stage at Merlefest. And I made contact and said, hey, I want to come in. Didn't have any money back in those days, but anyway, somehow I was able to go. And Alice walked up to me and said, Earl, I have somebody I want you to meet. And she brought Joe around, and literally when he saw me, I thought the guy was going to have a heart attack. Because, and as he explained it, he thought he was the last of the black old-time fiddlers. Well, subsequently, my aunt, and I guess Raleigh newspaper in North Carolina did a big article on Joe Thompson, and my aunt sent me a clipping that said, last of the black old-time fiddlers. So my aunt called me up and says, my middle name is Travis. She says, now Travis, if he's the last of the black old-time fiddlers, what are you? And anyway, I got a big laugh out of that. They got a big laugh out of it. And I said, well, I guess maybe they were wrong. He's not the last. Okay, Owen Walker. This is Dr. Roberts from Madison County, Kentucky, was one of the most recorded fiddlers of his day, cutting over 80 sides for Paramount, Gannett, and Arc in the 1920s and 30s. What is known of Owen Walker, as described by record producer Richard Nevins, Roberts' main stylistic influence was a renowned black fiddler, Owens, born in 1857, who taught Roberts most of his tunes. Martha Campbell was one of the first tunes recorded by Kentucky fiddler Doc Roberts in 1925. He remastered the tune in 1929 in an electrically recorded version on the Sears label. Music historian Charles Wolfe, 1983, believed that the tune related to Robert's Brickyard Joe was probably learned from fiddler Owen Walker of Madison County. He was a mentor around 1915. Jeff Titan is also of the opinion that Martha Campbell may have had African American provenance, and the process of oral transmittal of the tune from source fiddlers appeared to be from black to white. He reports that Kentucky fiddler Darley Fawkes spoke of hearing the melody for the first time in the 1920s from colored fiddlers, and notes that Fawkes' version, unique to him, included a bass part that maintained African American fiddlers included in their renditions. Martha Campbell was also recorded in the field by the Lomaxes and from the playing of white Virginia fiddler Emmett Lundy in 1941. He was 80 years old. So again, I had been playing Martha Campbell for years, and again, this was news and information for me as well, and as noted here, my goal was to share that information for people who want to know. Then there's Fiddler Earl White. Anybody ever hear of him?
Yeah.
This is a picture of myself and Mark Olitsky, Ohio banjo player. And again, what I have done over the years is, every opportunity that I have to play, and, those opportunities have been many, but just like myself as a young black person traveling around and dancing with the cloggers and going to all these places and hearing the music and, hearing about an association, but not seeing myself represented at a lot of these festivals. So a lot of what my goal has been is to get out there and avail myself as often as I can, because to preserve the music and to perpetuate it and keep it moving forward, the more opportunities we have to share this music and expose the young people to this music, that's basically what's going to keep it alive. Again, especially from the black community. I note that it was once a music that was shared and basically done in the black community, and a lot of that has basically been lost. So hopefully, through efforts of the Freight and Salvage, Susie and Eric Thompson, and all of my other friends who are out there playing the music and spreading the music, we can keep it alive and bring it back to many communities. Ebony Hillbillies, anybody ever hear of those guys? That was really funny. I was strolling through Union Square in Manhattan, and I could hear this old-time music coming from the subway, so I would run down there, and I stand off to the side, and it was these guys, this black group, sitting there playing music, but when I arrived, they had this big 5-gallon bucket, and they were dumping the money into a garbage bag. And then they'd sit there, and they'd wait. Then the next train would come, and as people were coming out of the train, they would start playing, and the bucket would miraculously fill up with money again. And I watched them do that a few times. And of course, in between trains, I walked over and introduced myself. And, and they looked at me like, who is this guy? And I look at Enrique, the fiddler, and I said, I explained to him that I was a fiddler, and they're looking at me like, yeah, right, okay, tell us another one. And so I asked him to let me hold his fiddle. And, the expression that I got back was like, yeah, this guy walks in the subway, wants to hold my fiddle, and then run away with it. So he was not having any of that. So I kept talking to him. They played another song, and I started clogging. And it was through the dancing that they just kind of loosened up, and they were like, oh, well, maybe this guy's really onto something. Anyway, I ended up playing a tune with them. and just express my joy at the fact that, you know, in my search for black fiddlers and groups playing, it was great. Anyway, the Ebony Hillbillies, talking to the Turners, and the fiddler lives not far from them in their neighborhood.
Actually, the entire group.
The entire group. All right, great, yeah. It's quite a neighborhood. The guy on the lap dulcimer, his name is Norris. He was also the banjo player, and he passed away a few years ago. So, Ebony Hillbillies. And anybody here ever hear of the Carolina Chocolate Drops?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, one of the last times I did this, some person walked up to me and he says, "Well, I noticed you didn't say a whole lot about the Carolina Chocolate Drops." And I said, "Well, you know, my goal was to tell you about people you don't know about." In current present times, more people have heard of these guys than the Tennessee Chocolate Drops. So anyway, this group of young kids, and that's a picture from afar, but I was teaching fiddle at the Swan and Oak gathering one year. It was a fantastic year because Tompkins County horseflies were there, and I was there and just had all these great, but anyway, a bunch of these guys took my workshop, and then a number of years went by, and the next time I saw them, they were the Carolina Chocolate Drops. I said, "Yes, keep it going, spread it." So all together now, long before the records or radio, the musical styles of different races, classes, and cultures of people rubbing shoulders, as Bill Monroe writes, anywhere that blacks and whites mingled in the United States, in field, factory, or mine, on railroad section gangs, in juke joints or taverns, at camp meetings and in church, at county fairs, or on the street corners, the potential existed for mutual cultural transmission. What was the musical contribution of the black laborers who followed the highways and roads as they inched their way up the Appalachian ridges? Did some early rural fiddlers also share a culture of poverty that offered common ground for musical exchange? Contrary to popular perception, Appalachia has always possessed significant and influential populations of color. The region, so named for the mountain range that runs through it from northeastern Mississippi to New York and beyond, historically comprises three subdivisions, northern, southern, and central, each with its own history of settlement and race relations. Indian nations, including the Cherokee, were the first peoples to inhabit the area, but by 1860, African Americans were approximately 10% of the population. There is, however, no one story of African Americans in Appalachia. Black Appalachians, like all Appalachians, have lived in rural settings as well as in urban settings. Current residents may have come from families that settled in the mountains hundreds of years ago, while others are first-generation migrants to the region. So I, again, talk about music as a cultural bridge and how, through music, people come together. Music is a thing that brings people together, and that's part of why we're here. That's why we're here together, right? Dink Roberts. Anybody here for Dink Roberts?
Yeah.
I'm calling one for your many times of time. If you don't like the way I do it, we're going down the line.
All right, well, that concludes my presentation, and I thank you. And part of the goal, too, was to foster discussion, take any questions, and basically, look for anybody who can share their personal experiences as well. So, any questions, comments? Yes.
Well, Earl, I was wondering if you had looked into or know anything about the Melungeon culture.
The which culture?
Melungeon in southwest, along the border of southwest Virginia and Tennessee. There's it seems like there's a lot of legends about them. There's a lot of dark-skinned people, and they were pretty I don't know, isolated, but they didn't have as much interchange with surrounding people. But there's not. I just wondered if you knew of any of their music. They did have a musical culture, and it seems like there's not a lot known about their actual racial origin. So.
No, I haven't, but I would love it if you'd write that down. Coming from Virginia, you know, a lot of what I've been trying to do. After I moved to Floyd, I found out also that there are multiple tunes that I've played for years that come right out of the Floyd, Virginia. So, like Shooting Creek and the Old Time Fire on the Mountain. But yes, if you could give me a note on that, I'd love to have an opportunity to research it and look it up.
You're not far from it. There are probably, I think there's still Melungeons in the area. You're not probably within half a day drive.
Mm-hmm. Great. I'd love to find out more about that. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, again, thank you so much. Thank you for coming and sharing this moment. And go play some music. Thank you.